You ever had one of those mornings where everything feels fine until, boom, you step outside and it's like you be walked straight into chaos? Yeah, that was me that day. I opened my front door, coffee mug in hand, just trying to enjoy a slow Saturday morning, and instead I was greeted by the sound of gushing water. I looked down, and my front yard was basically turning into a small lake. Water was bubbling up from the ground, spilling over my sidewalk, soaking the grass I'd just mowed the day before. For a second, I thought maybe a pipe burst on its own, until I followed the line and saw the real reason. Standing right at the end of my property, hands on her hips, was Karen, our HOA president. Red tailor suit, blonde curls all set like she was posing for some kind of HOA fashion magazine, clipboard tucked under her arm, and that smug look she always had whenever she thought she was in control. And there, right next to her feet, was a cleanly cut pipe. My water line. My private water line. I just froze for a second. Like, what the hell am I looking at? I walk up and I'm like, Karen, please tell me you didn't just cut my water line. And she goes, in this voice that just oozes attitude, we had to. You were in violation of community resource guidelines. I blinked. Community resource? What does that even mean? That's my water line, Karen. But she doesn't even flinch. She flips her clipboard open like she's reading from the Bible of HOAs and says, you've been diverting shared water flow for personal use. The board has voted to temporarily disconnect until you bring your system into compliance. I swear, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the level of crazy I was hearing. Karen, this pipe's been here since the house was built. You didn't vote to disconnect my line. You cut it. That's vandalism. She raises an eyebrow like she's the sheriff around here and says, you can take it up at the next board meeting. By now, a couple of neighbors had started to wander over. You know how it is. Someone sees flashing water and boom, everyone's out with their phones. Some were whispering, others just pretending to water their plants while trying to hear what was going on. And there I was, standing ankle deep in my own water, arguing with a woman who had just decided she owned my property. I bent down, picked up the piece of pipe, still dripping, and held it up. Karen, this is my property. You don't have the right to touch it. You know that, right? She just crossed her arms, gave me that tight-lipped HOA smile and said, when homeowners misuse shared infrastructure, the HOA must act. Shared infrastructure? I snapped. Karen, I'm not hooked up to your HOA water. I pay my own bill. You don't even manage utilities. She just shrugged. Not anymore, apparently. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control. Karen loved being in charge. She thrived on it. Every month she found some new violation to hand out. Too many lawn decorations, wrong shade of fence paint, a garden hose left visible from the street. She treated this neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, and now apparently she thought she controlled the water. I could feel my blood boiling. I told her, you're gonna fix this right now, or I'm calling the county. Karen tilted her head, gave me that fake sweet smile and said, oh, by all means, call whoever you want. Just remember, our HOA guidelines supersede local permissions within subdivision boundaries. That line right there almost made me lose it. Supersede local permissions? She was talking like she ran a mini government, so I did call. But not before things got even messier. Because a few minutes later, as we're standing there arguing, 2 police cars roll up, lights flashing. Yep, Karen had called the cops. Apparently, she told them I was tampering with community utilities. So these 2 officers step out, all serious, like there's an active crime scene. One of them asks, sir, what's going on here? Before I can even open my mouth, Karen jumps in. Officer, this homeowner has been illegally rerouting water from the HOA system. We've taken emergency action to prevent further theft. I just turned to him and said, you mind if I show you my water bill real quick? Pulled it up on my phone right there in front of everyone. The officer looked at it, then looked at her and said, ma'am, this address isn't listed under HOA utility management. Karen's smile twitched for a second. Just a flicker. But she caught herself fast and said, Well, the board decided to expand oversight to ensure consistency in community usage. Translation: she made it up. The cop just sighed, clearly realizing he'd been called into a neighborhood drama, and said, "All right, let's keep this civil. Nobody's touching anything until we can confirm property jurisdiction." Karen didn't like that. You could see it all over her face. She turned that glare on me, like I was the problem here, then said through clenched teeth, "You're making this harder than it has to be." And I said, "No, Karen, you are." I swear, for a split second, it felt like the whole street went quiet. Just the sound of water trickling down the curb and that one sprinkler going off in the distance, like background music to the dumbest argument of my life. Then she storms off to her car, yelling something about documenting non-compliance. I watched her drive off, red suit flashing in the sunlight, and I knew right then, this wasn't over. Neighbors started coming up to me, shaking their heads. "Man, she's lost it," one said. Another whispered, "She tried to fine me for leaving my trash bins out 10 minutes too long." Everyone had a Karen story, but cutting someone's water line? That was next level. I looked down at the soaked grass, then at that broken pipe in my hand, and I made a quiet promise to myself. She wasn't gonna get away with this. You don't just walk onto my property, vandalize it, and act like you own the place. So I grabbed my phone, took pictures of everything, pipe, damage, even her walking away, and I started making calls. County records, utility companies, property deeds. I didn't even fully know what I was looking for yet. But I knew there had to be a line somewhere that proved she had no right to do this. And as I stood there, drenched and pissed off, watching the sun start to dip behind the trees, I had no idea this was only the beginning. Because what I was about to uncover about Karen, the HOA, and this entire neighborhood was way bigger than a busted water line. And trust me, by the time I was done, that red suit of hers wasn't gonna look nearly as powerful, because she picked the wrong homeowner to mess with, and I was just getting started. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I kept seeing that busted water line spilling all over my lawn, and Karen's smug face as she strutted off like she just saved the neighborhood. It ate at me. I sat up around midnight, turned on the kitchen light, poured myself another coffee, and pulled out my laptop. If she wanted to play rulebook wars, fine. I was going to learn the rulebook better than her. First thing I looked up, what exactly can an HOA control? Turns out not nearly as much as they think they can. They can nag you about your mailbox color, sure. But utilities? Nope. That stuff's governed by city or county infrastructure, sometimes state. Water lines, electrical connections, gas meters, all fall under public jurisdiction unless it is a private shared system. So if my house had its own hookup, which it did, then Karen had zero authority to touch it. But I needed proof. Karen was the kind of person who did not back down with logic. You needed something signed, stamped, and sealed to shove right under her nose. So I started digging into the county's public records site. It was clunky as hell, one of those ancient government pages that looked like it was built before Google existed. But once I got the hang of it, I found gold. Property maps, zoning codes, subdivision filings, all the stuff that defines who owns what. I scrolled through the map until I found my street, zoomed in, and clicked on my parcel number. Right there, clear as daylight, water utility, operated by North Valley Utilities, county regulated, non-HOA managed. I leaned back, half smiling. Gotcha, Karen. But then something weird caught my eye. There was a section under Community Management Agreements. It listed a private utility oversight contract dated 15 years ago, before I even moved in. The listed contact? HOA Management Group, signed off by K. Delaney. My stomach dropped. Karen Delaney. She had somehow tied herself, or the HOA, to the utility oversight long before most of us even knew her name. I opened the document, and it was basically an old agreement where the HOA assisted the utility company with customer communications and billing within the community. It was full of vague language, the kind of legal fluff that could be twisted however she wanted. But what really got me was this line. The HOA retains administrative authority over compliance and service adjustments as per community governance rules. Service adjustments. That was her loophole. She had found a way to convince herself that cutting my water was within HOA authority. I sat there shaking my head, muttering, "You slick little snake." So I dug deeper. I wanted to know if this North Valley Utilities company was even real, or if it was just some front Karen setup. A quick Google search led me to their website, which looked barely functional. The phone number went straight to voicemail. The office address was just a P.O. box in the next town over. By now it was past 2 a.m., but I was wired. I called the county water department and left a message, explaining that I had questions about who actually owned the service line for my property. I knew they would not answer until morning, but I needed to get on their radar. Before closing my laptop, I clicked through a few old HOA meeting minutes. You can find them online if you know where to look. And there it was again. Karen's name, attached to everything. She was the one who negotiated the service partnership. She was the one who proposed the maintenance fees. And she was the one who pushed through the motion to fine homeowners for non-compliance with infrastructure standards. Basically, she had built herself a little empire, a fake water kingdom, where every drop came with a $sign and her signature on it. The next morning, I got a call back from a county utilities clerk named Laura. She sounded tired, like she dealt with HOA drama way too often. "Okay, sir," she said after I gave her my address. "Your water connection is under the county's jurisdiction. Your billing is processed through North Valley Utilities, yes, but that's a county partner. HOAs have no authority to disconnect service. Only the utility provider or the county inspector can do that. So, if the HOA president cut my water line, what does that count as?" She paused for a second, then said, "That would be property damage and possibly tampering with county-regulated infrastructure. You should file a report immediately." That's when I leaned back and said to myself, "All right, game on." After that call, I drove straight to the local county office. I walked in with my phone full of pictures, the broken line, the gushing water, Karen standing there like she owned the place, and I filed a formal report. The clerk at the counter looked at the photos and just sighed. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA trouble?" Bingo. He said they would send an inspector within the week to verify everything. But he also gave me a piece of advice. Keep documentation. These HOA folks like to twist things. You want proof of everything. I already had proof. What I needed now was to expose how deep Karen's little operation went. So that night, I kept digging. I cross-checked the HOA's public financial filings. They are supposed to be transparent to homeowners. And sure enough, I found some interesting numbers. There were utility administration fees listed every quarter, thousands of dollars collected supposedly to cover shared water infrastructure maintenance. Except there were no shared systems here. Every house had its own line. Meaning, Karen had been collecting fake fees from homeowners for years under the illusion of a shared water system. I sat there staring at the screen, jaw clenched, because now it all made sense. Cutting my water line wasn't about rules. It was about power and money. She thought if she scared me enough, I'd pay her to fix it, just like the others probably did. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to get my water back. I was going to burn down her little paper empire, one document at a time. I printed everything, copies of the utility contract, the HOA minutes, screenshots of the fake fees. My dining table looked like a detective's crime board by the time I was done. I didn't even care about sleep anymore. I just sat there, highlighting connections, drawing lines with a marker. By the end of the night, I had a timeline, names, and proof that Karen had overstepped big time. But I knew if I went straight to her, she would just spin it and make me look like the problem. So I decided to wait, for the county inspector, for the right moment. Because when I confronted her next, I wanted it to be in front of everyone, the board, the neighbors, maybe even the same cops she called on me. And as I shut off my laptop and looked out the window at that dark, quiet street, one thought hit me hard. Karen wasn't just some nosy neighbor, she was running a racket, and I was going to be the guy who took her down. Man, once I started asking questions, the neighborhood turned into a confessional. People who had been quiet for years suddenly had stories to tell. I knocked on doors like some kind of neighborhood detective, and almost every house I visited had some version of the same tale: sudden utility cutoffs, surprise repair invoices, threats about non-compliance. They had all assumed it was normal or that complaining would make life worse. Turns out a whole lot of folks had just been paying to avoid drama. First stop was Mrs. Ortega, 2 houses down. She's in her 70s, has this sparkle in her eye even when she is mad, and she makes a mean lemon pie. I figured she would laugh me off, but when I told her why I was there, she shut the door, dragged out an old shoebox, and started pulling stuff out. Receipts, notices, little folded letters with no return address, invoices for plumbing work that she said she never authorized. "They cut my line 2 summers ago," she said softly, "and then they told me I had to pay for emergency repairs. I had to borrow money from my son." I sat there stunned, flipping through a stack that showed the same pattern. A sudden emergency repair, a fast invoice with a short payment deadline, and then the threat of fines if she did not pay. She showed me a faded envelope where someone had slid a note under her door saying, "Pay this to restore service or face citation." She had paid. Most people had paid. Mostly because they were scared of the hassle. Mostly because Karen made it feel like there was no choice. Next, I talked to a young couple who had just moved in last year. They had a newer house, and they were this chill, soft-spoken pair who seemed like they would never have to deal with HOA drama. Wrong. Their story was wild. They came home one evening to no water, no note, no warning. Their neighbor told them the HOA had scheduled a compliance shutoff and sent them a bill for a plumbing company IS visit. They had to call their boss and use sick time to get the line fixed. The invoice had a company logo they had never heard of. The company came within hours, fixed the problem, and left a bill that read, HOA authorized. The couple paid it because they had no idea what else to do. Later, they found out the plumbing company was registered to a Delaney family business address in a nearby town. Coincidence? I did not think so. The next morning, I stopped by the post office to chat with old Mr. Larson. He knows everybody and everything because he has been in this area his whole life. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "You know that red-headed girl, Karen? Her cousin runs Delaney Plumbing. Small outfit. Woman named Carla. Handles a lot of HOA calls for him." He tapped his finger on a map and pointed. "They get paid, and the HOA acts like the water problem is solved." I asked him for names of others who had similar complaints. He gave me 3. I called all of them. Their stories matched like clips from the same movie. Cutoffs, emergency repairs, invoices, immediate threats, and then pressure to pay. A pattern was forming, ugly and obvious. After those calls, I spent the afternoon collecting every scrap of paper anyone was willing to give me. I took photos of invoices, saved emails, collected copies of letters. I even snagged a photo of a Delaney plumbing van that had parked outside Karen S. house more than once. Somebody had snapped it for me and sent it over. I started making a folder on my laptop labeled HOA Water Scam. It felt dramatic, but I liked that feeling. It meant I was building evidence, not just ranting. I also found a weird trail in the HOA's public records. There were line items labeled Utility Management Fee and Emergency Response Fund. Those entries had matching memos that mentioned contracts with local providers, but the contractors were all small, obscure names that did not show up in a normal search. When I cross-checked business registrations, the Delaney name popped up more than once. A cousin here, a relative there. Several of these small plumbing outfits shared an address tied to a shell company that the HOA had used for administrative transactions. I started to feel sick. This was not just mismanagement. This looked like intentional funneling. I leaned on my investigative hobby and kept calling. I reached out to an old friend from college who does IT work for local businesses. He agreed to help me pull public records, dig through business registries, and trace payments. Within a few days, we had a names and numbers list that started to look like a conspiracy chart. Payments from the HOA to admin services, then to contractors, then back to a Delaney-associated account. A loop that funneled money away from community oversight and into family-linked businesses. Not illegal by itself, maybe, but questionable as hell once you saw the pattern. At the same time I was building a paper trail, I spent time talking to neighbors face to face. There is power in stories. When Mrs. Ortega told her lemon pie story at the corner grocery, someone else piped up about a fine they had paid. Then someone else said they had been threatened with a legal notice. Suddenly, the whisper network was loud enough to be noticed. People were angry. People were ready to act. That gave me a boost I did not know I needed. One day, while walking down Maple Drive, I saw Mr. Delaney's plumbing van parked by Karen's house. Two guys jumped out, did some work on a sprinkler, and drove off with a receipt slipped under the door that matched a recent HOA invoice. I took a picture. It felt like collecting evidence in a movie. Tiny, satisfying clicks of the camera shutter that meant someone could not claim I was making it up. I knew public exposure alone might not be enough. She had power because the HOA board trusted her. I needed direct proof of profit motive, proof that the HOA's funds were being used to enrich her circle. So I started requesting financials under the community transparency rules. They are supposed to provide audits and budgets to homeowners upon request. Karen tried to stall, but she could not forever. After an annoying week of bureaucratic back and forth, a copy of the year-end financial report landed in my inbox. It was messy. Under maintenance, there were line items for emergency repairs that spiked every quarter. The amounts were consistent with invoices I had collected from the plumbing contractors. When I matched dates, the spikes lined up with reported cutoffs. The HOA claimed these were necessary maintenance jobs. The contractors claimed they were urgent repairs. The receipts said paid. But the problem was this. The contractors were essentially one step removed from Karen's family. Common addresses, shared phone numbers. It was sloppy, but it was there. By now, the neighbors had started to look at me like a leader, which I did not want at first, but I accepted because someone had to step up. We started small, a neighborhood meeting at the park, people bringing printed copies of the invoices they had paid. The park meeting felt like a trial. People stood in a circle and told their stories. At first it was hush-hush, then it got louder, angrier. Someone suggested going to the news. Someone else suggested filing a class action complaint. I told them to hold up for a second. I wanted a strategy, not a media circus. We formed a little citizens group. We called it the Neighborhood Utility Oversight Committee, which sounded way more official than it was. We wrote to the county inspector, sent copies of the invoices, and requested an audit. We made sure every document was dated, every receipt was logged, and every verbal claim was recorded. We even started a shared drive where neighbors could upload evidence anonymously if they feared retaliation. Karen responded exactly like I expected. She ramped up the intimidation. More letters under doors. Threats of fines. A note left on the community board implying the neighbors who complained were troublemakers. She tried to discredit people by implying they were irresponsible homeowners, but it backfired. People retaliated with their own stories and copies of invoices. The more she tried to close ranks, the more people opened up. At one point, Karen tried to threaten me directly. She sent an email saying that my accusations were defamatory, and I should cease and desist. I printed the email and taped it to my wall like a badge. I had more than accusations now. I had a pile of receipts, an audit request lodged with the county, a citizens group, and witnesses ready to tell their stories. Still, there was a part of me that knew we needed something bigger to finish this. Money trails, invoices, angry neighbors. That was solid. But to make a real change, we needed to hit where it hurt. Public accountability. So I started reaching out to a local investigative reporter I had followed on social media. I sent a polite email with a brief outline and attached a few sample invoices. To my surprise, she wrote back within a day asking for more. She said, "If this is true, people will care." That was the moment everything tilted. Once a reporter smells a pattern and sees documents, things move fast. But I also knew reporters move fast for a story, and a story alone could blow up a neighborhood. I wanted the county to act first, to have official backing. So I told the reporter we were waiting on the county inspection and to hold off for now. She understood. By the time the county inspector called to say they were sending someone the following week, I felt oddly calm. We had done the work right. We had receipts, we had witnesses, and we had a pattern. Karen had built an empire of fees and fear, and we had mapped her kingdom. The next step was obvious. We were going to confront her in a way she could not spin away. We would bring the documents to the next HOA board meeting, present the audit requests, and make sure the county inspector saw the same evidence we had collected. If they tried to deny it, we had recorded witness statements and a reporter on standby. As I stacked the last folder on my desk and powered off my laptop, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. This was not just me anymore. This was a community, and we were playing smarter. The calm before the storm felt different this time, like a quiet exhale before a riot. I knew Karen would not go down without a fight, but I also knew she had underestimated us badly. The next meeting would be the moment of truth. The second time it happened, I did not even get mad right away. I walked outside, looked at the broken water line, and just laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from disbelief, not amusement. The sun was blazing, the ground was soaked, and that same pipe was ripped open like it had been on purpose. Again, same exact spot, same repair notice pinned to my mailbox with that smug HOA stamp on it. And I absolutely knew, this was Karen's little message. Her way of saying, "You think you can challenge me?" Cute. Watch this. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering. Someone muttered, "Man, again?" I waved them off. Inside, I made myself a coffee and sat on the porch steps watching the water dribble down the curb. I was done playing her game on her turf. No more yelling on sidewalks, no more back and forth letters. It was time to flip the script. That night, I started digging again, but this time, I was not looking for dirt. I was looking for leverage. I pulled every HOA document I could find, and I noticed something interesting buried in the fine print of the old community development records, the water service contract with the local utility company. It had been signed nearly 20 years ago, long before I even moved in. The contract was due for renewal in 2 weeks. My first thought was, wait, so technically, the HOA's deal with that company is not permanent. The company could decide to not renew, right? Or renew under different terms? So I called the county office. After a long hold, a bored-sounding clerk confirmed it. Yeah, the service area for your community is managed by a private utility provider under contract. That agreement expires soon. They usually renew automatically unless there's a complaint or new ownership. New ownership. Those words hit me like a spark. I hung up, opened my laptop, and started researching the utility company. Clearwater Services LLC. Tiny operation. Fewer than 30 employees. Based 1 county over, a mom-and-pop outfit that handled rural zones and small communities like ours. When I looked up their ownership filings, I almost spit out my coffee. They were privately owned, and their shares were listed with a local business brokerage. They were for sale. I felt my pulse pick up. Karen had been flexing her fake power because she thought she had control of that contract. But if I owned the company that controlled her, well, let us just say I liked the sound of that. I called up an old friend, Mike, who runs a small property investment firm. I told him what was going on, half expecting him to laugh. Instead, he said, "Wait, you're telling me that HOA's water service company is for sale? Dude, that's a strategic gold mine. If it's small enough, we could buy a controlling share easily." Within 24 hours, Mike had his accountant look over the financials. Clearwater Services was stable but undervalued, barely profitable with aging infrastructure but steady contracts. We pooled together some savings, called in one silent investor, and set up a quick meeting with the owner. When I walked into their modest office, an old building next to a feed store, the owner, a gray-haired man named Dale, looked at me curiously. "You're from Maple Ridge Estates, huh?" he asked. "Heard about the drama with your HOA president. Nasty stuff." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, you could say that." Dale leaned back in his chair and said, "Truth be told, I'm getting tired of running this place. Too much paperwork, too many headaches. If you're serious, we could talk about transferring majority control. You'd be the new operating partner. I'd stay on as consultant for 6 months." My heart was pounding. This was real. We talked numbers, shook hands, and by the end of that week, I was holding the preliminary agreement. It felt insane, like something out of a movie, but every piece lined up. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down on her little power play. She sent out HOA-wide memos saying, "Certain residents are under review for non-compliance and unauthorized utilities use." My name was at the top of that list. She paraded around the neighborhood in her red suit, talking loudly about community standards. I just smiled and waved from my driveway while plumbers worked behind her. My plumbers, by the way. By the following Friday, the papers were signed. The funds were wired. Clearwater Services now had a new majority shareholder. Me. The wildest part? The renewal contract Karen had been banking on was now sitting on my desk. She had no idea that the company she thought she controlled now answered directly to me, and I wanted to make sure it stayed that way until the right moment. I kept everything quiet. Not even Mike knew all the details I had planned. I went about my days like nothing had changed. Every time Karen passed by pretending to ignore me, I had to fight the smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth. A few days later, I scheduled a visit to the HOA office. Karen was sitting behind her desk, surrounded by her little stack of binders, wearing that same bright red suit like it was armor. She gave me that fake smile. "What can I help you with today?" I said, calm as can be. "Just wanted to let you know I've been talking to the utility company." That wiped the smirk off real quick. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," I said. "You'll probably get a notice soon about some contract changes. Just business stuff, nothing personal." Her eyebrows pulled together. "Changes? What changes? Our contract is automatic." I shrugged, pretending to be casual. "Guess you'll find out when they email you. Have a good one." And I walked out before she could ask another word. That night, I sat on my porch again with a cold beer, watching the sprinklers hiss over my lawn, working perfectly, of course, and thought about how poetic it all was. Karen had spent years bullying this neighborhood through her fake control of utilities. Now, she was about to learn that she never actually had control. 2 days later, the first official memo went out from Clearwater Services, signed by me as the new managing partner. It was short, professional, and to the point. Effective immediately, all service requests and contract renewals for the Maple Ridge Estates HOA must be reviewed by the new ownership team. Please direct all correspondence to our new management office. Within minutes, my phone started lighting up. Karen called, then texted, then emailed. Her messages went from polite confusion to panicked irritation. "Why am I getting notices from Clearwater? Who authorized this? You can't interfere in HOA affairs." I did not reply. Not yet. The best part was watching the ripple effect. The board members were confused, the residents were curious, and Karen was furious. She called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss false interference with essential services. I showed up, sat quietly in the back, and waited for the fireworks. When she started ranting about outsiders meddling with HOA agreements, I finally raised my hand. "Actually, Karen," I said calmly, "the utility company isn't an outsider anymore." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned back in my chair and said, "It means I own it. So technically, you're yelling at your new service provider." The look on her face was priceless, pure shock and disbelief, mixed with just enough rage to make it cinematic. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. That moment right there, the silence, the stunned faces, the realization spreading like wildfire. That was when the game flipped. Karen had been swinging a stick she thought was power, but I had taken the stick away and handed her the receipt. For the first time, she was speechless, and I had not even started with what came next. Because owning the utility company was not just revenge, it was leverage, and I was about to use it to rebuild everything she had broken. The next HOA meeting was packed. You could feel the tension before you even stepped inside. Like the air itself was buzzing with gossip and curiosity. Folks were whispering in little clusters, holding printed violation letters in their hands, all stamped with Karen's favorite words, "Immediate action required." She had been busy. Apparently, she spent the entire weekend drafting fresh penalties and so-called utility fees for half the neighborhood, doubling down like nothing had changed. When I walked in, she was already at the front of the room, red suit sharp as ever, hair done, clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a royal scepter. She looked at me the way a cat looks at a mouse that forgot to run. "Oh, good," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You decided to show up this time. Maybe now we can resolve your little water situation." I just smiled. That's the plan. The chatter died down. She cleared her throat and slapped her stack of papers on the table. As of this morning, she began, the HOA board has voted to issue additional penalties for continued violation of our community's shared resource guidelines. That includes unauthorized water use, tampering with lines, and public disrespect toward the board. Someone in the back snorted, and I swear I saw Mrs. Harris, the 70-year-old who bakes cookies for every new neighbor, roll her eyes. But Karen pressed on like she was reading scripture. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and waited until she finished her little speech. Then, real calm and measured, I said, "You done?" Her smile wavered. "Excuse me?" "Because I think everyone here's been wondering about one thing," I said. "Who exactly gave you the right to mess with people's water lines? I mean, cutting pipes, shutting off service, all that. You sure you've got the authority?" A few folks murmured. One guy near the front nodded. Karen straightened up. "Of course we do," she said firmly. "The HOA has an exclusive service agreement with Clearwater Utilities." "Correction," I said, interrupting her. "Had an exclusive service agreement." The room went still. She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" That was my cue. I reached into my folder, pulled out a stack of documents, and slid them across the table to her. She looked down, eyes scanning the bold print at the top. Transfer of ownership, Clearwater Services, LLC. Then she saw the signature line at the bottom. My name. For a solid 5 seconds, she just stared at it. No blinking, no breathing. Then, like a fuse finally catching fire, she snapped her head up. "What kind of joke is this?" "No joke," I said. "As of last Friday, Clearwater's mine. Bought the controlling share fair and square. Filed with the county. Notarized. You're welcome to verify it, but I'm pretty sure you already know the renewal notice came from me." The room went absolutely silent, the kind of silence that's louder than shouting. A couple of people gasped. Someone muttered, "Holy crap." I stood up slowly, let the words sink in. "So here's how this works now," I said. "Water service for this neighborhood is under new management, which means all these fake fees, all these threats, all these violations, gone. Every single one of them. Starting today, everyone's line gets reinstated. Nobody owes a single penny to this HOA for utilities." A ripple went through the room, like a wave of shock and relief all at once. Then, out of nowhere, applause broke out. Genuine, loud, grateful applause. People started clapping, cheering, even laughing. One guy shouted, "About time somebody stood up to her!" Karen's face turned the color of her suit. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "You don't have the authority." "Karen," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm, "you've been pretending to have authority for years. Harassing people, cutting off services, handing out fake fines. You built your little kingdom on intimidation and loopholes. But guess what? You never owned the water. And now, you don't even control it." She tried to talk over me, waving her hands, insisting it was illegal interference. But then Mr. Grant, one of the older residents who's usually quiet, stood up and said, "Karen, sit down. We've had enough." That did it. The crowd turned. The same people who used to fear her were now speaking up. They started listing their own stories, how she fined them for garden hoses, for sprinklers running too long, for repairs she claimed violated community aesthetics. I stepped aside and let them vent. It was like watching a dam finally break. When she finally sat down looking pale and furious, I walked to the front and said, "For years this HOA treated people like tenants instead of homeowners. You crossed the line, literally, when you cut my water. So now I'm just here to make things right. Clearwater will service every home fairly, directly, no middlemen. And for anyone who paid one of those bogus water fines, we'll review refunds case by case." That got another round of cheers. Karen slammed her folder shut, muttering something about getting her lawyer involved. I looked right at her and said, "You're welcome to. Just make sure he reads the county jurisdiction laws before he calls me." Her eyes narrowed, but she did not say another word. By the end of that meeting, something had changed. You could feel it. The fear that used to fill those rooms was gone. People lingered afterward, chatting, laughing, like the weight had been lifted off the whole neighborhood. I walked outside into the evening air, and for the first time in months it felt calm. No shouting, no threats, no notices stuffed in mailboxes. Just peace. A few neighbors came up to shake my hand. One of them, Mrs. Harris, said, "Honey, I haven't seen her speechless since the day she fined a guy for hanging Christmas lights in October." I laughed. "Yeah, well, she might need a new hobby now." As I got into my truck, I looked back at the HOA building. Through the window, I saw Karen still sitting there, just staring at those ownership papers, phone in hand, probably realizing there was no one left to call. The funny thing was, I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just satisfied. Because it wasn't really about revenge. It was about balance. About reminding people that power doesn't come from titles or clipboards. It comes from doing what's right, even when someone's trying to drown you in nonsense. And as the streetlights flickered on and the sound of sprinklers filled the quiet night, I smiled to myself. Karen's empire had finally run dry. Man, you would not believe how fast things spiraled after that HOA meeting. The news spread like wildfire, and not the kind that burns quietly in the background. I am talking full-blown chaos. Within a day, half the neighborhood knew what went down. By the end of the week, everyone had seen the video clips. Yeah, a few folks had their phones rolling during the big reveal, catching Karen E.'s face as I slid those ownership papers across the table. It was golden. The video went viral locally, and suddenly, the Queen of Control was trending for all the wrong reasons. At first, Karen tried to act like it was no big deal. She sent out one of her classic HOA statements, claiming everything was under review and that the situation was being handled internally. You know, that typical corporate nonsense tone she loved to use, but nobody was buying it. The neighbors were furious. People started digging up their old fines, their weird water bills, and those random infrastructure fees that had never made sense. It was like everyone suddenly woke up and realized they had been paying tribute to a self-appointed dictator. One guy down the street, Dan, who had paid over $1,000 in water compliance charges, came knocking on my door the next morning. He had his whole stack of receipts in his hands, shaking them like he was ready to start a bonfire. "Bro, you just opened Pandora's box," he said, laughing, "and I'm here for it." He was not the only one. People were gathering in groups, comparing notes, sharing screenshots, posting stories online. My phone was blowing up with messages from neighbors thanking me, asking what to do next, even offering to pitch in for legal action. Then came the county. Turns out, when a few of those videos went viral, someone in the county inspector's office saw them. A couple of reporters reached out too, small-town journalists looking for the next HOA horror story. And man, did they find one. Within a week, the county had opened an official investigation into HOA corruption and misuse of funds. I did not even have to push for it. It just happened. The truth was finally catching up to her. Meanwhile, Karen S. cousin, the one running that exclusive plumbing company, got hit with a subpoena. Word was, investigators were tracing every fake invoice and shady repair order linked to the HOA. People started whispering that the cousin was flipping, ready to talk to save himself. It was like watching a tower crumble from the inside. Every brick she had stacked with manipulation and fear was now cracking open. The funny thing is, I did not even have to do much at this point. I just stayed calm and let the facts work their magic. Whenever a neighbor came to me asking what to do, I told them the same thing. Document everything. Keep it clean, keep it legal. That became our motto. No yelling, no drama, no vandalism. Just pure truth and receipts. And that truth hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Karen tried to fight back, though. Oh yeah, she did. She called an emergency HOA meeting, her last attempt to hold on to whatever control she had left. She walked in looking exhausted but still wearing that red tailor suit like it was her armor. She tried to spin everything, blaming miscommunication and unauthorized leaks of internal documents. People just stared at her in disbelief. The same folks she had bullied for years were now sitting in that room with evidence in their hands. It was over, and she knew it. Then one of the board members, Linda, who had always been quiet, stood up and said, "Karen, we're done letting you represent us. It's time you step down." That moment hit like a punch. Karen froze, her lips trembling just slightly. For the first time, she had no script, no smug line ready. She just stood there, looking around the room as every hand slowly raised in agreement. One by one, the board voted her out. That was it. Karen, the woman who thought she owned the whole neighborhood, was officially done. She stormed out of that meeting like a storm cloud, her heels clacking on the floor, muttering something about ungrateful people. A few minutes later, we heard the sound of her pink SUV starting up outside, then fading down the road. That sound, man, it was like the first breath of peace the whole neighborhood had taken in years. After she was gone, things changed fast. The tension that used to hang over every HOA meeting, every street corner, every neighborly wave, it was gone. People started talking again, actually enjoying living here. I worked with the new interim HOA president, a calm guy named Jeff, to set up fair pricing and transparent billing through the utility company. Every homeowner now had clear access to their own usage reports. No hidden fees, no random compliance charges, just honest numbers. And let me tell you, the neighborhood started feeling alive again. Kids playing on lawns, sprinklers running freely, people laughing over fences instead of arguing. Even the air felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, this place felt like home again, not some mini dictatorship under constant watch. Of course, a few reporters came by to get my side of the story. I kept it simple. I told them it was never about revenge. It was about fairness. People deserve to feel safe and respected where they live, not bullied over bogus rules and fake fees. They turned that quote into a headline, and honestly, I was proud of it. But here is the part that really hit me. One morning, I was walking past Karen's old house, and it was empty. The blinds were closed, the garden overgrown, the driveway empty. For someone who used to patrol the neighborhood like a hawk, her place now looked forgotten. It was poetic in a way. The woman who tried to control everyone's homes ended up losing her own. Sometimes I still think about how close I came to just walking away and letting it all slide. But standing up, not just for me, but for everyone here, changed everything. It reminded me that you do not need to shout to fight back. You just need the truth and the guts to stand by it. So yeah, that is how the neighborhood found peace again. Karen's reign ended not with chaos, but with clarity. The HOA went through a full audit, and with Jeff leading the board now, we actually started building something good. Community events, transparent budgets, real trust. And every time I turn on the water in my house, I smile a little. Not because I own the utility company, though yeah, that part still feels wild, but because it flows freely without fear or manipulation. Just clean water like it should be. But I have got to tell you, this story is not over yet. Because what happened next? It made me realize something much bigger than just one HOA battle. It made me see what power and greed can do to people, and how truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to break through. You know that feeling when something as simple as running water suddenly means everything? That was me, standing in my front yard one quiet Saturday morning, listening to the soft rush of water through the pipes again. The same line that Karen had once ordered to be cut, now repaired, sealed, and stronger than ever. It was not just water anymore. It was victory in its purest form. Every drip, every splash was a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight power is to take control of it. The sun was spilling over the rooftops, the neighborhood calm for once. No HOA patrols driving around, no random violation notices taped to doors. Just kids playing on bikes, sprinklers clicking in perfect rhythm, and neighbors waving as they passed. It felt free. Like we all had been holding our breath for years and were finally allowed to exhale. I walked over to the patch of dirt where the water line had first been cut. The grass was already growing back, fresh and green. It was funny. That one spot had been the start of everything. The argument, the chaos, the investigation, the power shift. Now it was just part of my yard again. Peaceful, normal, I crouched down, brushed a bit of dirt from the pipe cover, and smiled. That simple, steady sound below my feet said more than any speech ever could. Karen's house was empty now. The for sale sign had been up for weeks, and a young family had already toured it the day before. Her red SUV, the one that used to crawl through the streets like a warning signal, had rolled out of the neighborhood for good. I watched it once from my porch as she drove off, the morning light bouncing off that shiny hood. No shouting match, no final confrontation, just quiet. That was her ending. People still talk about what happened, at block parties, over fences, in group chats. But now it is told like a legend. The day the HOA president tried to control the water and ended up losing everything. Some laugh, others shake their heads, still amazed it all actually happened. But for me, it is not about what I gained. It is about what we got back. A sense of fairness. A community that trusts each other again. The new HOA president, Jeff, turned out to be the real deal. Transparent, level-headed, actually listens to folks before making decisions. Imagine that, right? He set up open financial meetings so everyone could see where the funds were going. The difference was night and day. No secret fines, no hidden fees, no threats over mailbox paint colors. Just people managing their neighborhood the way it should have been from the start. Sometimes I still get messages from homeowners in other towns who saw the story online. They tell me about their own Karens, their own power-hungry HOAs that overstep and bully. And I always tell them the same thing. You do not have to fight fire with fire. Just find the truth and own it. That is the part Karen never understood. Power does not come from control. It comes from doing right by people. That evening, I sat on my porch, the same one where I had once watched officers question her about the water line, and cracked open a cold drink. The sky was glowing orange, and the world felt easy again. The sound of sprinklers echoed down the street, the kind of background noise you barely notice until you remember what it feels like to lose it. I leaned back in my chair, grinning to myself, and said out loud, "Cut my water? I just bought the company." I could not help but laugh. It sounded like a movie line, but every bit of it was true, and it felt damn good to say it. For a while, I just sat there, letting the breeze roll by, thinking about everything that had happened. The fights, the late-night research, the paperwork, the endless meetings. It had all led to this peace. I had not just beaten Karen, I had turned her game inside out. And now, every homeowner here could sleep without worrying about another bogus notice showing up in their mailbox. I looked out at the street one more time, at the place that had been both a battlefield and a home, and I felt this deep sense of closure. The kind you only get after standing your ground and seeing it through. The kind that tells you, yeah, it was all worth it. Then I looked straight ahead, as if the audience was sitting right there across from me, maybe sharing that same quiet evening. I smiled and said, if you've ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare, hit like, share this story, and subscribe. Because sometimes justice flows both ways. And with that, I raised my drink, listening to the soft hum of life around me. Kids laughing, sprinklers running, neighbors chatting. The kind of sounds that make a place feel like home. The kind of peace that comes only after you stop letting people like Karen decide what peace should sound like. Yeah, justice, it turns out, sounds a lot like running water.